I'd like to introduce everybody to Dr. Michael Lustgarten, a PhD in physiology. He runs the YouTube channel Conquer Aging or Die Trying, which I love the title, by the way. It's something actually I was going to play along with that title for my YouTube channel back in the day, and then I ran into your channel that way. He's one of the top 25 slowest agers at the Rejuvenation Olympics, right? I think you were bumped down a little bit, but I know you have some comments about that that hopefully we'll get into. And you're one of the OGs in terms of personalized data-driven testing, right? You use your own biomarkers to guide which interventions you do to increase your health span and hopefully lifespan as well, right? So welcome to the channel. Thank you so much for being here in the last day of 2024.
Thanks, Lucas. It's my honor.
Yeah. Great. I was hoping we can kind of go through. I know there's tidbits about your routine. You've done some interviews in the past year on different channels, and there's tidbits about your diet. So I don't want to get too much into the weeds of that, but your diets and exercise. But I think it'd be helpful if we can kind of skim over that and overview your maybe daily routine, what you do, and gear it around the testing, because I know that's something that's essential for your interventions and your whole routine. So maybe if we can start what a typical day looks like for you when you wake up, what you do, generally kind of what you eat, when you eat, and then we can go from there.
All right, so let me just backtrack start with the premise, right? So as a kid, I read a lot of books in terms of what's the optimal diet, and back then, which somehow it was eat a low-fat diet. 10% of the calories come from fat. So I always, when I was a kid, up through high school and beyond, basically lived by that, in addition to the junk food that I was eating that was prevalent in my house. So nonetheless, I never really knew what is the optimal diet for me, right? It was just what others were recommending. So somewhere around 2015, I decided I need to have a data-driven approach to figure out what diet is best for me by tracking, just a standard panel of biomarkers that one gets when they go to the doctor every year, a yearly physical. Biomarkers of kidney function, liver function, metabolic health, the lipids, the standards, nothing too crazy or outrageous. So I started using that data or tracking that data in conjunction with daily diet tracking and any supplements that I might be taking at that time. And then once I got to 3, 4, 5 tests, I started looking at correlations between my diet with the biomarkers and trying to move the biomarkers towards my most youthful values and values that are associated with the lowest risk of all-cause mortality. So over the past 9 to 10 years, that's shifted my diet away from actually the idea that quote unquote low fat may be best for me. And then it kind of argues this idea of, well, I was basically on that low fat diet for probably decades up until I discovering this. So how much damage did that do? Knowing that my current approach is not 10% of the calories coming from fat is best for more biomarkers going in the right direction versus wrong. All right. So with that in mind, a typical day now, the diet focuses around what the biomarkers dictate. So I wake up somewhere around 4 to 6 a.m. on a good day. Lately, I've been struggling to get past 3, where I've got to basically meditate myself back to sleep. And I've got some thoughts on why that might be and what I could potentially do about it. But that's a struggle. But when I'm up 4 to 6, then I'm eating a bunch of nuts and seeds. So it's a mix of almonds, peanuts, macadamia nuts, walnuts, sometimes flax seeds, sometimes mixed with dates. I'll have a can of sardines, and then some yogurt mixed with berries. And this is all basically following correlations with diet and following an overall dietary structure in terms of protein, carbs, fat, and actual micronutrient targets too, not just trying to get higher than the RDA. But I don't know if you want me to go through every step in the diet, but basically I'm eating, a big portion after I wake up. I don't eat then for a few hours. I eat then a relatively large meal, cooked and then a little bit frozen in a smoothie around 11 to 1. And then I basically shut the majority of the eating window off, where if I do have anything, it's like tomatoes and pickles, something, satiating in very small calorie amounts from about 1 p.m. onward until bedtime, which is somewhere around 8:30 to 9 every night consistently. Okay. And I do that because the diet is so heavy in fruits and vegetables, and I'm not vegan, but it is heavy in fruits and vegetables that the water content if I'm not ending my eating window relatively early, even around 1 p.m., I'm waking up more often in the middle of the night, which affects sleep quality and duration. So,
Right.
um, yeah, so it's basically a majority fast. It's like a almost like a 16-8 or even sometimes like a 17-7 eating window. I'm
So
trying
it
to end
sounds
it
like,
as early.
sorry, go ahead.
Not just trying to end the eating window as early as possible.
Okay. Sounds like two main meals, basically around 4 or 5
Uh,
in the morning, and then around one. You said a second
yeah,
meal.
it's about two main meals. Yeah, I've experimented with OMAD where it's I didn't eat all day until getting home from work, and then it was like from 5 to 8 p.m. eating everything for the day, and that was terrible for sleep quality with all the fruits and vegetables. I mean, I was waking up every hour. Um, on in-person work days, it is basically like almost 1 3/4 or even as close to all those two meals in the from the 4 to 6 or 4 to 7 a.m. And then when I get home, it's only like 100 or 200 calories of the 2,100 or so that I'm eating. So, and then I'm fasting while I'm at work. So, on the at home days, it's a bit of two meals. On the in person work days, I mean, as close to all of it in the morning as possible. And then I don't have to think about food at work, which is great.
Okay. And then in terms of the content of your food, you've mentioned on, I think a few months ago, I was watching one of your interviews that around 40% of your calories came from fat, close to 40% from carbs, and then the rest were from protein. Are you still around that breakdown?
Yeah, I mean, it's close to that. My most recent test, the diet that corresponded to that, the average 53-day period that corresponded to the most recent blood test was, I think, 39% fat, 36, 38% net carbs, 18% protein, and the rest coming from fiber, 7%. But the
Mm.
fiber calories can be added to fat. So technically, it's like 46% coming from fat. Yeah, and that seems to be correlated with my best, most youthful biomarker profile, looking at 25 or so standard biomarkers, and that's not including the metabolomics or epigenetics, just focusing on the biggest picture biomarkers.
Okay. Okay. And then in terms of the content, so what do you eat? You mentioned sardines, you eat a lot of nuts and fruit. What about meat? So is it a general omnivore diet that you're still eating?
I'd say it's right now it's closer to pescatarian with dairy. So what is that? Lacto pescatarian. But
Ovo.
ovo is occasionally. I had eggs for the last period. I've taken them out since.
Okay.
Um, but I do have eggs in there occasionally. I'm not opposed to meat at any point. It's just sardines have omega 3. Meat doesn't have omega 3, so I get that bonus, in addition to the protein. And then when following the correlation, sardines have a stronger net positive correlative score relative to beef or eggs. So I try to focus on the stronger correlations, the higher net positive correlative scores relative to other food types. But so I'm far from vegan. It's just that certain animal products may be better for my biomarkers.
Okay. And I noticed I think you were talking with Sim on his channel about an interesting LDL experiment you were doing. I don't think we need to get into the weeds too much of it, but essentially you were trying to raise your LDL a little bit, right?
Yep.
How did that go, and where are you at with that experiment?
Yeah. So it was actually trying to raise LDL without blowing everything else up. Because if I
Mm-hmm.
cut all of my fiber containing foods out, I could easily raise LDL. I could probably double it in a couple of weeks. But
Mm-hmm.
then based on my biomarkers, higher LDL isn't, although it's inversely correlated with Dunedin pace, the epigenetic pace of aging, higher LDL in my case is also significantly correlated with a lot more biomarkers going in the wrong direction than right. So I was just trying to push it a little bit higher, try to get around 90 milligrams per deciliter relative to the 80 or 75, just to see if moving the needle that would move also Dunedin pace in the right direction. So since then, I've actually moved away from that approach. So I did a deep dive on Dunedin paces. So Dunedin pace is an epigenetic algorithm that's based on 19 clinical biomarkers, and one of them is lipoprotein A, which is also an ApoB containing protein like LDL.
Mm-hmm.
So in my case, LDL is always on the lower side of the range, and not by accident. It's probably my diet. High fiber is has been shown in a multitude of studies to inversely correlate with LDL. So that's probably why my LDL is always on the lower side. But for whatever reason, lipoprotein A has always been uh, right outside the reference range, or if I'm not on the right diet, in quotes, even like double to where it is. Now, with that in mind, lipoprotein A is a part of that Dunedin pace algorithm. So people who have higher lipoprotein A's will have higher epigenetic paces of aging. So I've moved away from the LDL story as I wasn't able to get it with small dietary tweaks without messing up everything else. Just to even go 15 milligram per deciliter increase, whereas I could impact lipoprotein A more because that's got more room to move into even just the reference range. So, 2 tests ago, in following correlations, I used cocoa beans, which are inversely correlated with lipoprotein A in my data, and increased them. And lipoprotein A was still relatively high, 90 nanomolar. But then following other correlations, I reduced lipoprotein A to 80 nanomolar for this most recent test relative to the last test. I don't yet have Dunedin pace to see where if it moved, but I'd expect that, knowing that all of those 19 biomarkers, I mean, it's like VO2 max, HbA1c, total cholesterol, white blood cells, hsCRP, almost all of that is youthful in my data. The two biggest weak spots that I could improve would be lipoprotein A, but then, I mean, even VO2 max, technically I've got room for improvement there. I mean, all of us probably do.
Yeah.
But without going through the VO2 max story yet, so we'll see if a 10% or so improvement in lipoprotein A makes a dent in Dunedin pace.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. So sticking to the diet, could you generally talk about maybe what are the lowest hanging fruit for a general individual? Which biomarkers related to diet can they track, and which tests would you recommend to track those biomarkers?
Yeah, so I'd start with the basics. Just even the standard chemistry panel and complete blood count, which is a $35 test USD. You've
Mhm.
got kidney, liver, immune cells, metabolic health, lipoproteins. This is a wealth of information.
Yeah.
So I'd start there. If you add HSCRP, now you can look at phenoage, which is strongly correlated with chronological age, although it does have chronological age in its model, so maybe that's a bit skewed. But nonetheless, the biomarkers that it includes are, they're also representative of all, liver, kidney, immune, inflammation, metabolic health. So even without the cutesy number of that biological age test, these are major biomarkers of major organ systems. Um, so if you include HSCRP, now it's an $80 test combined, and that's a wealth of information. Then it gets to the testing frequency. I think most people are only testing at best maybe once per year. But then you figure that that's representative of your data on that day. How many tests do you need per year to be a true representation of a full year average? I mean, you
Right.
could even make the argument that my 8 tests in 2024, that's still 357 days where I didn't test. So is 8 days representative of a full year average, right?
Mhm.
I'd argue it's better than one test. So, and eventually we'll get to the point whether it's, smart toilets or finger prick where we can do this stuff every day and get a better representation. So I'd start there. Then the question is, what can move those biomarkers towards your most youthful data, right? What's your own personal recipe, your own motorcycle, your own zen of motorcycle maintenance, right? And there's no easy answer there. For example, I have correlations in my data for beta carotene, which comes almost exclusively from carrots and green leafy vegetables. It's correlated with higher albumin, which is good. That's what's found in youth and low all-cause mortality risk. Clients that I work with will have the opposite, where beta carotene is inversely correlated with albumin. So there, from my experience, there is no one size fits all approach. And then there's also personal preference. Maybe some people enjoy eating a certain way. So it doesn't have to be my way, which, I'm a volume eater. If I'm not eating volume, then it's easier for me to be less satiated, and less satiated can lead to, overeating, and overeating is the antithesis of a pro-longevity approach.
Mhm.
So a big part of it too is, within someone's current diet, even on a whole food based diet, what can we tweak to make your biomarkers better? So there's nuance to this that takes a lot of testing, so that's the easy answer. Test, track your diet, track the supplements, and start looking at your own correlations and see what may be moving the needle in your case, right? Or others.
And you weigh your. I think you mentioned that you weigh your food. You're very regimented with your diet, right? So have you seen? I guess you've seen success obviously with your clients because you have clients and keep them coming back to you with this approach of regular testing, multiple tests per year, and then being having a more varied diet and not as regimented, and they've still seen success and correlations, right?
Yeah. So there are many roads. I think there are many roads to optimal health, right? So, um, I almost never move people towards my diet. That's not what I'm trying to do at all. It's, people have dietary preferences to start with. Like if I like collard greens, most people won't eat, a pound of collard greens a day, and in my data, that's an all-star. Or beets. I'm eating raw beets, 300 grams a day. I mean, this is maybe a tough sell for a lot of people. So, um, I start with their dietary foundation, and then, the goal is to get the RDA for all vitamins and minerals, right? Like we try to clean up any dietary deficiencies if they exist, regardless of what the diet is. And then that takes a few tests, and now we're collecting data. And then when we're collecting that data and, moving away from, I think most people are eating too much, processed junk. So it's eating a bit less processed junk, cleaning up the diet as much as we can, and then getting full RDA coverage at a minimum. And then that's data collection phase. And in the first, 4 or 5 tests or so, we're looking, at correlations, but it's so few data points that it's hard to, it's hard to identify signal versus the noise, right? But at least we've got a starting point. And after we've got RDA and cleaning up the diet by a bit, after the 4 or 5 tests, now it's all right. These are what your correlations show. Let's follow it, right? And so we've got interventions for every test going forward. And because myself and my clients are tracking their diet for at least a week, before the test. I mean, granted, I try to get all my clients to track every day, but this is a struggle for most people to track the diet, that carefully.
Mm-hmm.
Especially weighing their food is, a challenge for most people, right? So,
Yeah.
um, at a minimum, getting 1 week of dietary data before the test is going to be more valuable than no dietary data. And it's just you're guessing at what you can do, which from historical experience, it was worthless. I started off on this path with no track dietary data. And then it was like, all right, my liver enzymes are a bit too high. What can I do? All right, well, this is what's published in the literature. Let me try that. And things that you hear about like milk thistle or too much green tea or too much fructose didn't make a dent on my data. It wasn't only until I started following my own correlations that it was like, it's a little bit too much maybe of walnuts, or and I started to see my data move towards more youthful values. So um, it's a constant iterative process, right? And I'm always very upfront, with all of my clients in the beginning, where I say, this isn't a 1 or 2 test kind of deal. We're, as we talked about, this is a long game, and there's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of noise in the beginning, but the more data that we collect, the closer we get towards the truth. I have some clients that have blood tested almost as much as me, but they're testing once a month, whereas I'm doing it every, 6 to 8 weeks, or that are testing, urine protein levels, 5 days a week, and then have 50 data points over 3 months. So this is how you get to the truth of what may be best for kidney function, right? So um, it's the highly dedicated crowd. And just to add a little bit more to this, so we are working on an app, but the developers are still in university, so that's slowing them down. And I don't want to put the horse whip on and be like, let's go. I understand they've got other stuff on the plate too, but eventually you can just upload your blood test data and export Chronometer or MyFitnessPal or whatever diet tracking that someone may be using, and the correlations are relatively simple, right? So, but people will be able to get that readout instantaneously, whereas I've got to do it manually, and enter it on my own. So,
Looking forward to that.
cool.
Yeah, it's awesome. Okay, so sound just to summarize it, sounds like you recommend the more testing within reason, the better, right? And you recommend complete blood panel, right?
Yep.
And then you recommend not regimented dieting, but the closer you can get to knowing what you're eating, what you're consuming every day, every week, the better, right? The easier it is to figure out kind of what correlates with your different blood results. And then we didn't touch on in terms of caloric restriction. Is that something that you recommend, or that you're doing, I guess, personally yourself?
Well, I've ended up, calorie restricted. I don't know, somewhat intentionally, but now there are no plans to go back. But I had something else about the overall approach. So it doesn't have to be exactly the same diet if someone doesn't want to track, because then, how do you know what to change if your diet has no changes? But within that context, if someone's supplementing and their diet is exactly the same, but in order to know it's exactly the same, there has to be some measure of tracking, right? Like I've also had clients where I'm like, okay, let's follow the correlations and cut down on animal products, right? And they'll say, well, I cut down on animal products. And then I look at their tracked dietary data and I do a 2 sample T test of 30 days or 30 days, and there's no difference in animal product intake, right? So, you know, it, you can standardize your diet, but you actually have to track by a bit to know that you're not changing anything, right? If that's the goal. So at least a week before, testing. But also, I try to standardize variables that can impact the blood test results. So, for example, hydration status the morning before the test. If someone's just waking up and going in to get a blood draw, maybe they drank less water on the day before or for the few days before, and then they're a bit dehydrated. And as if your blood volume is a bit less for whatever reason, your glucose levels may look higher, a little bit higher, or blood urine nitrogen may look higher. So 2 hours before every test, I've got 20 ounces of water, standardizing it. Every test to test. The fasting window before every test, what if you fasted for 8 or 12 or 14? Like, does that impact the data, the next day data? I don't know, right? So early on, I fasted for 17 hours. There's no magic to it. That's just what it was. So to stay consistent, I try to stay in that ballpark, 16 to 18 hours before every test, the same fasting window to minimize that variability. And then exercise, like if you did a hard workout the day before, for sure that's going to impact biomarkers. So for me, I try to have it on the Friday before a Monday. So it's like 2 to 3 days before the blood test, my hard workout, 90 minutes, and then titrate activity down until the test, so that overtraining is not a phenotype, a part of the blood testing results. And
Right.
the other variable too is whereas there's a lot of popularity around, my Dunedin pace, like not to blow smoke on Brian, but he posted the other day a Dunedin pace of 0.57, which is fantastic.
Oh, I
And
didn't see that. Oh, yeah. Okay.
yeah, I'm all respect. That's kick ass. So um, I posted under his comment, hey Brian, that's great, but what's all of your data for 2024? And I think a lot of what's missing too in this space is this singular focus on one or two or three blood tests. Like, to even get onto the Rejuvenation Olympics leaderboard, you need 3 tests over 2 years. But do the math. That's 365 times 3, 1100 days. You have 3 data points for 1100 days. Is that representative? So what
Mm-hmm.
I'm most interested in is this year to year change, right? How many tests do you have in 2024? And is that better than 2023? Not for one metric, Dunedin pace, but all of the organ system biomarkers, right? And if it's not, what can you do to improve those weak spots so that you're keeping your biomarkers, you're flattening, I imagine, because there's no data on this. If your biomarkers of kidney, liver, lipoprotein, all of the major organ and systemic function biomarkers are not changing for decades, have you flatlined mortality risk, right? I mean, it sounds weird to say flatline mortality risk because, right, mortality is basically a flat line in terms of electrical activity, right? But have you flattened mortality risk? So that I think most people aren't thinking about it like that. You want to have enough tests every year so you can track year to year change, and then identify weak spots within the biomarker groupings within that, so that you're trying to improve multiple spots rather than a singular test here and there.
Yeah, the approach makes sense to me. I mean, I don't know how much you can flatline it. I mean, but at least keep that disparity, that margin between your chronological age and biological age, at least as wide as you can as you increase in chronological age. I think that would make sense too. Yeah.
Yeah, right. But so for example, using something like PhenoAge, just the algorithm, the maximal reduction you could have chronological minus biological is about 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
And even if your biomarkers all stay the same for those 9 biomarkers, your biological age increases by zero point 0.9 years per year, which doesn't make sense to me, because if you've got literally the biochemistry for those 9 biomarkers, and then if you incorporate this approach to all of the biomarkers, if you've got literally the biochemistry of youth as an 80, 90, 100-year-old, are you only 20 years younger? I mean, is that really the best? I mean,
Right.
I find it hard to believe, right? So,
Yeah.
especially if you've got it literally mapped, like you've got your 20-year-old values all of those biomarkers, physical function, body composition, if all of that hasn't changed, are you really that chronological age, right? So, um,
So the ranges of that scale may be a little bit skewed, right?
it's it's an error inherent in the test, right?
Yeah.
But I try to take it a step further. I always get criticism for people that first I get biological age tests are garbage, and then I'm like, well, pheno age, in a multitude of studies, increased all cause mortality risk, increase, even in COVID patients, people that were biologically older using that test, like 12 years before the pandemic, it was a predictor of who was more likely to die having an older pheno age 12 years early. I mean, there are a multitude of studies that have shown its utility, right? So, but then even if you take out the cutesy number and just look at the individual biomarkers, can you resist age-related changes? And if so, for how long? And what's going to be the impact, if any, on health and potentially lifespan? That's where my bet is. I don't know how. I don't know what weakness in that approach, other than if I only focused on those biomarkers, I may be missing blind spots like blood pressure or lung function, other organ systems that aren't included. So I try to cover those bases too. I shouldn't say I try to. I do cover them as much as possible.
Yeah, if you're covering as many biomarkers as you can, chances are low that you're going to miss a blind spot, right? And that approach makes sense to me too.
And then
That's
worst case scenario is if I can't get to, conquer aging and I died trying, well, at least I've squeezed the orange, right? The juice that's in my genetics for my maximum lifespan. Maybe that's 80, right? It never would be 120. Maybe I was going to be dead at 50. My dad's brother died at 51. He had a stroke at 47. My dad's dad, my mom's dad, my mom's brother, 67, all done heart disease related issues, right? So, um, I'm Matt Damon. I'm partially Matt Damon in The Martian, where he's stuck on Mars and he's got to science out of, survival. I mean,
right.
if I want to get to the stated goal, I've got to science it as much as I can, right? So,
So it sounds like you have a genetic predisposition to cardiovascular disease on one side of
yeah,
the family.
I could. It's in the family history, but whether that's, in my case too, I don't know. Maybe that's why the lipoprotein A, if I do nothing, is, up to twice as high as where it is now. I'm not sure, but right now I see no indication of that in my data. My CVD risk is low. I don't know about pre-existing CVD though. I haven't gone for, the ultrasound, looking at the atherosclerosis. Um, but my risk should be low. My lifelong data for LDL and it's been relatively low, so risk should be relatively low. Blood pressure is 120 over 80, fully fed. I don't know what it is fasted, but there's no signature right now. HSCRP is super low, so
Okay, but you have no, like you said, you have no imaging data to reassure you.
not not yet, but that's coming. Yeah, that's definitely on the agenda.
So that's, I wanted to touch on that, but maybe we can segue to that right now. I guess maybe. So, do you see any utility, obviously, in whole body MRIs and calcium artery score testing, whole genome testing to get a risk predisposition for certain diseases like cardiovascular disease? Have you done any of those tests, and which tests do you think are important to do? And yeah, your data, I
Yeah.
guess.
Yeah. So MRI, full body MRI is atop my list. I looked at that heavily. It isn't in Boston yet. And I thought about driving down to New York, but
That's
uh,
surprising. It's not in Boston.
yeah, they have it for a research study up here, but it's not available commercially. Or actually, the company that I was looking at, and then I didn't see any others, Pronuvo, I think that's the name of it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's atop the list, and that's like a $2,500 test. And I was eager to do that, but I bought a house this year, so I was more eager to not have to pay a mortgage. So that's one I have to kick the can down the road for a little bit. I want to say I'd be shocked if I don't get the full body MRI done late 2025 at the earliest. But even then, there's a little bit of variability in that. It could be 2026. But I see the highest utility there, in addition to the looking to see if I have any atherosclerosis, and if so, slowing that more over time. Genomic prediction, we may disagree a bit here, but I've kind of have the same approach now with the epigenetics. Both the genomics and the epigenetics are predictions of what can happen, and all that's not meaningless. For me, I think it's the story of what's actually happening or has happened. So the proteins, cells, metabolites, as a part of that story, to me, are more informative relative to, you know, only the genomics or only the epigenetics, which are the what can happen. Now, doing nothing and only looking at chronological age, probably not a good idea. So genetics and epigenetics in that context, obviously a good idea. But
Mhm.
for me, I see the most value. And I actually had this, internal debate before going to grad school. Where do I see the most utility? Is it genetics? Is it metabolomics? So I heavily lean towards the metabolomics on the story of what is happening relative to what can happen.
Even though I'm a geneticist, I'm not going to disagree. I'm not going to disagree, right? I mean, genetics is your blueprint. Like you said, it's telling you what can happen. I think it's very valuable information to know what you're predisposed to. And then a handful of people, less than 10% have, a Mendelian disease that they should be aware of, obviously. Some of them are later onset. So I think that's important to know. But other than that, I think metabolomics is the way to go. It's telling you what's happening right now, and that's how you can reduce your risk, right? Even if something's written in your genes, it's not your fate necessarily, right? That can be altered as well.
But the drawback too, though, is so as far as I know, commercially available metabolomics is only 600 or so metabolites, and even in the lab, we can get 2,000 metabolites, but 1,000 are they aren't named, so you just have like an X1749. Nobody even knows what it is. It hasn't been identified, right? Chemically identified. It's only been structurally identified. So that's still a small snapshot of the full circulating metabolome. It's like 4,000 metabolites, 600 versus 4,000. So
Right.
on the other hand, genomics, uh, you know, it's easy to do whole genome sequencing and then look at, you're looking at the full genome, right?
Mhm.
And prediction based on the full genome relative to a partial metabolome. So I can see it from that point of view, but
Mhm.
yeah, I see the most utility in the metabolomics. But it's so new too that there are so few studies that there are things that I'll be looking. I'll have metabolites in my data, and I'm looking for published studies, and there's like almost nothing known. There's one study. Like, how much can I take away from one study in a sample size of 150 people, right? So
Yeah. So in terms of that, what is your experience? I think have you done the EOLO test, the 600 and so metabolites? Yeah. What's your experience?
13 times.
Okay. Wow. Okay. And how has that been correlating with your blood biomarkers and possibly your epigenetic score?
It's a part of the story. So I don't think most people have to take it to that level. I mean, just the basics. But it wasn't until about 40 blood tests with the standard chem panel and CBC that I started to evolve it out into the epigenetics and metabolomics and some other stuff. So I was most interested in optimizing the foundation, the big picture
Mhm.
biomarkers. So wait, before going to the Iola story, so I think there's a hierarchy to all this, right? So, and I've said this in other places at other times where it used to be the Jack LaLanne approach: eat real food and exercise. And then I won't name names, but there are people still in this space who their approach basically boils down to that now: eat real food and exercise, and you'll achieve longevity, which is sure, you'll get to 90, you increase your risk of getting to 90, but I want to go well beyond that if I can. Right. So then how do you evolve that approach? What is the next level? And that gets to the specificity of tracking and biomarkers, right? So for sure, at the highest level is physical function. You could even include cognitive function, because what good is physical function if you feel terrible all the time, and that affects cognition, right? So physical, cognitive, function, body composition, right? So bone density declines during aging, visceral fat increases during aging, visceral fat removal extends lifespan in rats. So being lean for as long as physically possible, all of that I put at the top of the pyramid, right? But then taking that a step further, right? So what's under the hood? So now we're looking at cells, right? So white blood cells, red blood cells, platelets. I mean, now we're covering all of the cells that are circulating in blood. Now, ideally, looking at tissue function, right? So then we get into biomarkers of tissue function, because doing a liver biopsy or a gut biopsy, it's just impractical. Nobody's going to do that on scale. So so we've got the cells. Now we're looking at protein and metabolite markers of tissue function, right? So but even subdividing that, in blood, you've got proteins, metabolites, but then the metabolites can be split into, lipids and sugars and a whole bunch of other metabolites, right? But even just starting at proteins, there are a lot of proteomic based studies. We could have put that in the box of this is the story of what's happening also, right? Proteomics. But they almost all proteomic studies exclude the biggest trees in the forest. So, the blood is an ecosystem, right? And you have certain species, I shouldn't say species, but proteins, for example, are the most abundant things circulating in blood outside of cells, right? So they have to take out the biggest, most abundant proteins, albumins, globulins, fibrinogen, and then look at the low abundance proteins in the proteomic analysis. Because if you do it, the 2D gels for the proteome, it will be heavily dominated by albumin, globulins, and fibrinogen, and you won't see anything else on your thing, right? So, but I see the most value in looking at the biggest trees in the forest, albumins, globulins, fibrinogen as a starting point. Now, you could add some of the lower abundance proteins in there, like cystatin C, which may be a better marker of kidney function relative to creatinine at older ages. But so taking that a step further, we've got cells, right? Then we've got the proteins, the three that I just mentioned, the three groups. But then you've got the metabolites. So some of those metabolites indicative of, kidney function, urea, uric acid, creatinine, but then other metabolites, right? EPA, DHA decline during aging. I'm looking at other uremic metabolites. These are elevated in the presence of poor kidney function and are also a readout of gut health, indoxyl sulfate, paracresol sulfate, TMAO. Those are from the metabolomic test. Kynurenine to tryptophan ratio, which, I say these things and they seem esoteric, but, and I, and I say this humbly, but, you know, there's going to come a time when these things like kynurenine divided by tryptophan are in the public vernacular, like they're a common thing. And so basically the importance of that ratio is that tryptophan is degraded into kynurenine by pro-inflammatory factors, or actually it's an integration of pro and anti-inflammatory factors. So if it's elevated, you've got systemic inflammation that goes beyond hsCRP. hsCRP is not one of the factors that triggers tryptophan degradation. So, and it's associated with Alzheimer's disease related biomarkers like A beta 42, A beta 40, tau, phosphorylated tau. So kynurenine and tryptophan are on Iolo's panel 2. So I've evolved
Indirect
it.
marker of inflammation, but still a marker of inflammation, right?
Yeah, and not just inflammation, but oxidative stress, because SOD is a part of that equation too. For increased oxidative stress will trigger degradation of tryptophan. So I've evolved the approach into more than just the standard panel, but looking at every step under the hood. So I've got the cells, proteins, metabolites, and then I have been looking at the epigenetics, going as far down as I can, right? So I've tested, I think, 18 times for the past 3 years, which goes into the Dunedin Pace story. And, I have to preface this by saying I love the team at True Diagnostic. That's where I've got all of my epigenetic tests done. They're using Dunedin Pace and other, tests with, Morgan Levine's group, Systems Age, for example. But I've recently come to the idea that, in conclusion, that I'd rather track the actual biomarkers, just as an example, like they're giving me predictions of HSCRP via DNA methylation when I have the actual venipuncture data. So which are you going to believe, right? Are you going to, yeah. So for me, it's more important, and I think I'm going to take the epigenetics out for a few tests, and it's even hard for me to say that because for 3 years, 18 tests, I've done it for every test, right? Every blood test, every venipuncture test, I have epigenetics. So I'm basically going to cross that off the list for now and go all the way down to metabolomics, and kind of stray away from the epigenetics. I haven't seen any studies where, which is more informative of risk. If I have, for example, phenoage, right? Phenoage is those clinical biochemistry biomarkers, but there's also the DNA methylation based estimation of the clinical chemistry biomarkers, which is also used in some studies to evaluate risk. But I've yet to see a head-to-head matchup of the clinical chemistry biomarker, even Dunedin Pace. If you take its 19 clinical chemistry biomarkers in, VO2 max, waist to hip ratio, which is included in that. If you compare the actual versus the predicted, epigenetic versus risk, like I don't know how that's not included in the papers. And I'd imagine that it's hard to beat the actual clinical biomarkers versus the epigenetic predictions. So I don't want to rain on the epigenetic parade, but Uh, I do see utility though for things like Horvath, but as far as I know, there is no commercial Horvath on the market. I had to ask the True Diagnostic team to provide it separately, which they took it out of their reports. But Horvath still, which is the best prediction of your chronological age, and mine had been for a long time older than my chronological age, which not good. But
Mhm.
it's weak in terms of all cause mortality risk relative to pheno age and grim age and Dunedin pace, which have always been better in my case. So I do still see value in the Horvath, but less so on the others until they show me a head-to-head matchup versus the clinical chemistry biomarkers.
I mean, your approach makes sense. Sounds like you've had this. I mean, you've shown that you've had disparity, right, between the two: your blood biomarker chemistry results, and then also the mean pace, right, epigenetic clock. I think you had the lowest blood biomarker scores in 2022, possibly over a 1 year average, and then in 2023 or so, you had your lowest epigenetic score for that year on average. But essentially, I'm surprised to hear you say that because you were last I heard you talk on a few other channels. You were talking about finding a way to marry the two. Obviously, keep your blood biomarkers in an ideal range, and then also find a way to reduce your epigenetic age. It sounds like
Yeah.
yeah, you're seeing less value in that and just focusing on the latter.
I think my whole perspective
Straightforward.
changed.
Yeah.
I think my whole perspective changed when I did that. I'm going to science the out of Dunedin pace, and I looked at the 19 biomarkers, and then I was like, all of my actual biomarker data, except for lipoprotein A, and I haven't tested VO2 max in a few years, but I imagine it's terrible. I mean, I don't think you get through a 90-minute workout of lifting weights and calisthenics and no rest periods with a relatively low VO2 max. Now, granted, it's probably not 60, but um, and then you could say, all right, well, my Dunedin pace is consistently 0.83 for 3 years. So I've resisted any age related change. It increases during aging. So what? Now you're going to stop testing because you haven't biohacked it. I'm sure there are going to be people who say that, but uh, I'll go back to it at some point. When I'm able to kick in some of the aspects of my exercise approach, like more hit. I've like as you mentioned, I've got so many other things on the table right now that more time in exercise actually takes away from my performance during my 90-minute workout. But there will come a time in the near future where I'll have the time to incorporate as much hit as I want and change the frequency and duration of my workouts to optimize VO2 max while not missing a beat on strength and body composition and flexibility, all the things I'm currently focused on. But yeah, once I did that video, and then I was like, how is this even possible that the actual biomarkers are superb and youthful based on what's published, right? It's not just my confirmation bias, right? It's you know should be better, but I'd rather have the actual biomarkers, so
Yeah, I mean, hard to argue that. Okay, can we segue since you're talking about HIIT? Let's generally talk about your daily exercise routine, an overview what you do, and what testing you use to kind of track your progress with that.
yeah. So the workout is standardized, and I've done this almost in the same way as diet. So it's a 90-ish minute workout. I try not to have it go too shorter than that, or longer than that. So it's standardized in terms of sets, reps, weight, and movements that I do. It's exactly the same workout for every workout, and this goes back probably about 5 years. And so the one of the mantras in the fitness industry, and I was a fitness trainer for 2.5 years training other people, change it up, right? Change it up every so often, keep it fresh. So that's good for general fitness. But whenever I did that, whenever I returned to the movement that I changed it up from, I was always weaker, and there was that learning curve to get it back. So yeah, I changed it up and got better at something for a while, and then I got worse at the thing I went away from. And when I went back to that, it was this constant battle of getting better in one way and getting worse, and always having to get back to something. So by standardizing the workout, uh, I know exactly how many reps I should be doing workout to workout. And if there's any deviation there, then I can focus on it more. And that helps resist age related change within the workouts over a long period of time. So, I posted pull up videos on the channel. I was doing 12 pull ups, high quality, not Mark Wahlberg, not to rain on him, but, I don't know if anyone's seen him do pull ups, and, he's just basically jerking his scapula, but, chin above the bar, full extension, full flexion,
Mhm.
12 pull ups. 5 years ago, I posted it on the channel. I'm still doing 12. There have been periods where that went down to 10, and I was like, what the hell is going on here? So I had to think about, was I training too much? Is there stuff I'm missing in my diet? Because NAD actually may impact my workouts. Um, by being deficient in NAD may have an impact, but that's maybe a story for another day. So the workouts are standardized, and I've got it built right now where two 90-minute workouts per week helps me recover for the next workout. But I have to work around the in-person work schedule because, commuting and the stress of being physically present at work and having people talking in the office, this is wasted energy to me. Uh, you know, it may sound terrible to say, but there's a YouTuber, Cody Sanchez,
Yeah.
and I don't want to call myself a high value. I hate that whole definition, but I saw her on a TikTok the other day where she was saying something like, "High value people don't value small talk, and they value their time and they want to just get to it and cut out all the fat, basically." And I can't do that with the in-person work schedule. So um, in working around that, 2 workouts per week, 90 minutes per session, that helps me maintain or slightly improve aspects of my fitness over a long period of time, or it has. So there's no strength or functional decline. And I'm tracking, flexibility, mobility, balance, all of these things that get worse with age. I don't know if you follow so there are people on the internet now that didn't always exist, like knees over toes,
Hmm.
where it's strength through a full range of motion. And it used to be just like, for example, for squats, go to 90 degrees. I'm trying to have maximal range of motion. Basically, ass to grass if I'm doing a squat, or if I'm doing a lunge, it's literally knees over the toes, and then building that, with strength, right? So,
Hmm.
or touching my toes, knuckles touching the floor, so I'm trying to have the flexibility of an elite, ballet dancer, but with strength, right? And I have a lot of room for progress, but that's a part of the goal. So, um, but at some point, I'm planning on splitting up those two 90-minute workouts and training more often and incorporating more HIIT. Because right now I can only incorporate HIIT when the schedule is absolutely perfect in terms of I don't have to dedicate energy to things that don't actively improve my fitness, which has become rare, unfortunately. And those days that I can include HIIT, I look forward to it because they become so rare. So, but at some point in the near future, I'm going to incorporate that more often. But then that's a juggling act because too much HIIT, from my experience, messes up the strength and performance during my workouts. It's hard to deadlift a certain amount of weight if you did HIIT a day or two before. So I've got to work that out, but and I'm confident I can get that all sorted.
So are you getting into low rep ranges? Are you getting into heavy weights every workout? Or are those two workouts? Or?
So there's a mix. Heavy is relative. So for example, I'm doing overhead presses right now, 80, 85 pounds. I weigh 142, 141.
In terms of your one rep max, I guess.
I don't. I used to do that, and unfortunately, that led to herniated discs in my lower back, ego lifting, and trying to get 1 rep maxes. I was a gym head, a gym bro for a long time,
Hmm.
and I'd have herniated disc, wouldn't know it. Took trained around it for a couple of weeks, hit it hard again, and like couldn't put my shorts on. It was so bad. So avoiding injury, and I probably herniated the disc at least 5 times. Over the past, well, not fortunately 4 or 5 years. But before then, it was like every year it flare up, just trying to overtrain it and train it too hard. So I can't go too heavy with deadlifts. So I have to play it safe and be very conservative there. But for other lifts, I'm going as heavy as I can, trying to keep as much muscle as I can, be as, highly functional as I can, for as long as I can. Right. So,
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, that seems a little like the Peter Attia approach, right? To maintain your strength well into your later decades. I'm more cognizant about injury, kind of like you were with your back. I'm worried about my joints. I've devolved from doing those kind of exercises like you, where I was going heavy in my 20s and 30s, and now I'm in my young 40s, and I'm definitely taking a step back and doing more reps, right? Taking something relatively heavily, but going to 15 to 30 rep range, right? So seeing how that works out. But yeah, I mean, there's different approaches, there's different ways to skin a cat, but it's been working for me, maintaining muscle, and I'm happy with that. So
I include a variety of rep ranges, so obviously the lower rep ranges, you're going to train your fastest twitch fibers, and the,
yeah,
20 reps and more, you're going to train, 2As
yeah,
relative to 2X. So I do have a bit of that in there, but when it comes to like, I'm not doing 20 rep deadlifts at a lighter weight. I just get bored,
mm,
so I try to keep it 5 to 10 reps there and not go too heavy though. But I should say that the ego lifting mindset, I don't think it ever goes away. And before I had the herniations in my back. I'm obsessed with clean and jerk, and clean and jerk. If you're doing heavy ass weight, it's a strain on the back if you're not training properly, right? So
right,
I had visions 10, 15 years ago to eventually be the masters, record holder, because I was clean and jerking 205, 215 at
mm,
140. I wasn't 140 back then. It was probably 160, which
mm-hmm.
is a lot. I'm lifting over my body weight over my head,
Right,
right?
right,
But the disc herniation squashed that. But there are actually people on the internet who've opened my eyes in terms of properly strengthening the back so that disc herniations will never happen. I've gone to physical therapists and they're terrible. They have no idea. You
mm,
know, um, even things, I don't know if like Jefferson curls. So I've got a whole back, a large portion of my workouts, and I point here because my workouts are literally like right behind me in this small little
mm,
apartment. A large portion of my workouts is focused on strength and flexibility of my lower back from a variety of angles. And so taking that back to the clean and jerk, so I can see a day when I'm starting to work back towards that goal of masters athlete world records,
mm,
because it's still in there. I was doing 215, like I said, at that one time. And I mean, granted, I'm probably not too far. If I really tried, probably do 150 or someone like that. But uh, my injury risk, so then if I'm injured and I can't train and I can't stay lean and the biomarkers get messed up, right? So
yeah,
there's a
yeah.
balance there. But
Yeah, it's a big risk, but I mean, I wish you the best of luck. I hope you can get back down that route and do that. I'm sure you've seen the videos of the 80 and 90-year-old masters records holder, whether it's rowing or whatever other competition. There's people doing amazing things late in their life, and if you keep on being healthy like this and fix up your back, I'm sure we'll see a part of that.
the back's been good, right? So far, so good. So on the right road. So
Yeah,
and I see even the masters athletes like sprinting. So I'm like, I could do that, right? And
yeah,
that's why Seam and I asked Seam, I was like, because he posts videos of like these, super agers that are breaking masters world records. And I mean, yeah, I've always been into fitness, but at his age, I wasn't carrying as much muscle mass as him or as lean.
mm,
So, if you fast forward and you're the strongest and fittest 80-year-old, why not? Why not be the world record holder?
yeah,
Hold the record for 50 to 100 years. I think there's glory in that if you go out, right? So,
definitely.
um,
Yeah,
yeah,
as long as he stays injury free, for sure, for
yeah,
sure.
that's the big thing.
Yeah. So, what do you say you use to track your workouts? So, you talked about VO2 max a little bit. You haven't done that in a little while. Strength, I imagine you test your strength regularly. What other devices and other, I guess, metrics do you use for workouts?
Yeah. So because the workout is standardized, so overhead press and pull ups and, like push ups off a ball and the deadlifts, whatever, I know exactly how many reps I should be getting in a certain weight. So I don't write that down. It's all in my head. Um, but I do record the average daily heart rate.
Mhm.
I do record when I did the workout, like having a spreadsheet. So I'll record like 90-minute workout, FBW, full body workout. Or if I had to cut the workout in half, just so I have a log of when I did each workout. I really don't go back to it often, but that data is there. I track heart rate variability and resting heart rate, and that's helped my fitness. I shouldn't say fitness journey, but my I don't know, my health related approach innumerably. So uh, in 2018, I was doing 3-hour workouts. I've always had gorilla mindset, go in the gym and just throw heavy stuff around for as long as I can. 10 sets of bench, 10 sets of squats, just really just grinding the gears. And I was always tired and miserable. So once I started tracking the, HRV, resting heart rate, I mean, my data was like, I don't know, I had videos on the channel, it was like 48 HRV and It was kind of like the same 48, or maybe it was even higher, 48.51 for resting heart rate. And I was like, how's that possible? I should be, I was getting in 20 miles of walking a week, which sure that it's not running, but I'm basically walking close to a marathon every week with 3-hour workouts, lift the heavy weight. So I completely changed the approach. I think, and I've mentioned this in other places, right? So, you know, I think there's an aspect of longevity where even in the fitness community, that most people can be overtrained, right? So, sure, the fitness is fantastic for health span and increasing average lifespan, but where are the and I get pushback from some people, but I mean it's the truth. Where are the 122-year-olds that are super lean and fit that have been doing it their whole life, right? Now, there are a lot of factors that go into that, right? But usually it's 95, 100, and then, someone who's over 100 that's been doing it their whole life is the exception, not the rule.
Right.
So whether or not I'm right, we'll find out. But there's something about exercise that's both health promoting, average lifespan, health span, but maybe health a longevity shortening in terms of maximum lifespan. And the only way I can think to square that circle is, if you're training too much, you could have elevated markers of inflammation, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even acutely, you get an increase in inflammation, whether it's CRP or IL-6. So if you're chronically training, you're going to have probably chronic elevations in that. And inflammaging is a real thing where it drives, tissue and systemic decline. So um, I don't know if that's a part of the process, but by tracking when my body is actually closest to quote unquote recovered, knowing what my HRV and resting heart rate look like in the mostly recovered state, and then giving it sufficient time after workout to properly recover back to that state before hitting the next workout, I think I'm minimizing that overtrained phenotype and potentially, minimizing joint wear and tear while optimizing, health and fitness and performance. Whether
Mm-hmm.
that translates into getting from 95 to 120 and beyond, I don't know. We'll find out, but, and there's no published data. I don't think anyone's even looked at it.
Mm-hmm.
But so those are the two main metrics that I'm using to track right now. VO2 max will be a part of the approach regularly once we move into the house. But we're some time, a few months away from that. Uh, but at least once a year, VO2 max training in on the same day as DEXA trainings, doing DEXA body composition, which I'm now doing once per year. So I'm going to do those both at the same place. That's the plan in the future, at least once a year.
Okay. Okay. And then just circling back, you said on off days between your heavy workouts, you're just making sure you get enough steps in. You're not doing anything else too vigorous.
Yeah, so that's a tricky one because how much activity on the following a 90-minute workout will allow me to recover enough for the next workout 3 to 4 days away. So some days it's like a full rest day. Like today, no steps. I'm just chilling in the house, talking to you, and had a business call. And that'll move me toward. It should help move me towards recovery. I'm going to do some light mobility work, but that's like a couple minutes here and there. Or actually flexibility work. Some joint stuff like
Right.
some knees over toes stuff and strengthening my joints. So nothing too crazy there. But yeah, it's generally at this point light walking on the off days because I mean it's a 90-minute workout, and although I don't generally get sore anymore, I mean if you think about soreness from an evolutionary perspective, it's probably bad for existence, right? Because if you walked 50 miles and then were so sore the next day that you couldn't move, and a predator came into your little area and you're just fried physically, probably lunch, right? So uh, my workouts are so standardized that I generally don't get sore, but I do have basically whole body. There is some fatigue that I've got to recover from. So there's a balancing act there, but between too little recovery and recovery of the metrics, recovery systemically, and also doing too much where it slows recovery for the next workout. Which, if the workouts, from my experience, aren't twice a week, 90 minutes per session, um, I can get away with one or two workouts here and there and not sticking to that. But if I chronically cut the workouts short, or it's not once a week, that's going to affect in workout performance, and that's on the road to aging. Because before you know it, I'm not doing 12 pull-ups, I'm doing 6, and then I've got to try to work my ass off to try to get back to it, but maybe I can't, right? So
Okay. Makes sense. Awesome. So let's move over to sleep. I know you've been playing around with your sleep and something you've been tracking more of. you mentioned a little bit at the beginning of this of our talk. You stop your fluid intake, I guess, a little bit, and eating earlier in the day to help improve your sleep. So, kind of, what do you do for sleep to improve your sleep, and how do you track it? I guess probably with your wrist watch, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So tracking it with Whoop. And uh, I'm not here. I'm here not here to promote Whoop. I'm not trying to say that they're better than the others, the other trackers, but there's at
Yeah.
least one published study where polysomnography, which is you go in for a sleep study, they wire you up with the EKG, the leads all over, was compared against Whoop. Granted, the study sample size was small, but for total sleep time and slow wave sleep time, it compared. Well, doing the I guess the T test, there was no difference total sleep time in SWS versus the polysomnography. So it's one of the reasons I went with them. I don't know how the other ones compare, but for me, that was a selling point.
Mm.
And so SWS, I've actually had a sleep study done. This was like 15 years ago. I was getting really poor sleep quality. So, and granted, either my daughter was on the way at the time, her mother was pregnant, and I had a whole bunch, working on the PhD. Just there was so much going on that my sleep was just terrible. I was tired all the time, so I went in for the overnight sleep study, and in the best conditions, blackout room, nobody around, 5% total sleep was SWS. So in youth, in children, it's 25%, and 5% would be the values you'd expect to see in a 95-year-old. And yet at that time I don't know, my early 30s. So it wasn't until I don't know, 8 years later, 10 years later, that the wearables and sleep tracking was actually, I mean, they had some things like, they had the headband, and I may have tried that when it came out, but it wasn't very good, would fall off. So yeah, I started the Whoop basically for the sleep tracking. So um, and I spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to optimize sleep, which is still a work in progress. But all of the things you hear about work well for me, like trying to black out the windows. So I have one of my
Yeah.
windows blacked out, but it's not a perfect job. I'm on a busy street in Boston, so there is light pollution. But I've got it where I can kind of minimize that, but it does come through the room, especially if I'm trying to take a nap. Sometimes during the middle of the day, just the beam of sunlight has hit my eye and awakened me. So
Mm.
that's going to change at some point in the future when we make the move. I'm going to fix that. But I've got blackout shades. I sleep with earplugs, which isn't great for my ears. But I'm also on a busy street, so I've got these people at 2 a.m. yelling like maniacs. There are
Mm.
homeless people in the area that yell like maniacs. So dogs barking. It was a dog barking at 3 a.m. Like what? Even with earplugs, right? So
Yeah.
um, but without it, my sleep quality would be worse. So yeah, I do end the eating and drinking window. I mean, if I do have some fluids, I try to make it very little. And like for example, I have nicotinic acid for NAD suspended in about 50 milliliters of water. So I'll have a little bit of that like at 3 o'clock, but almost no fluid intake after one. Because I'll wake up in the middle of the night to pee, and if it's too, I'm drinking like a giant smoothie, and there's so many fruits and vegetables in the diet that it's just I'm chronically hydrated all day, so I've got to cut the eating window relatively short, eating and drinking window. Um, but that said, I'm still up. And last but not least, sleep onset. So getting to sleep at the same time every night, without fail, or trying to. And it's funny. Like my mom, we went to visit them, for the holidays, and it was like I don't know 4 or 5 o'clock, and I'm in bed getting ready to go to sleep at 7:30. I take about an hour just to decompress and let my mind wander, and you know, so I'm doing less of that when I'm trying to actually sleep, right? Because most people, I think, when we get to sleep, it's like the wheels are turning now that the eyes are closed. I don't want to do that. So,
Yeah.
but anyways, like I don't know, it was like 4:35, and she's like, "Yeah, we're gonna go out. And we're gonna do this," and I'm like, "I'm in bed in 2 hours. I'm not trying to run around for 2 hours."
Yeah.
So socially, people have to adapt because I'm not trying to ruin my sleep routine. Unfortunately for me, or unfortunately for others, probably a little of both. But sticking to that as much as I can is essential. But that said, it's not perfect. When I fall asleep, I do wake up to use the bathroom, and then once I hit 3 a.m., it seems like I'll get a good 6 hours sleep, but that's not enough. Where if I'm up for the day, I'm in sleep debt.
Mm.
So for me, getting 7 ish, 7, 7.5 of what the fitness tracker determines is a good night of sleep. But somewhere around 8 actual sleep time, but the fitness tracker says somewhere around 7, 7.5 is a good night of sleep for me. So the 3 in the morning, I've got basically got to meditate myself to sleep and relax myself because now my brain seems to be wide awake when it should be staying asleep. So I'm working on that. I don't know if I can fix that, but there may be some issues here with I might not be getting enough morning sunlight to trigger circadian rhythms later in the day. That's a
Right.
hypothesis I'm going to try out later in the year. Um, but that's the main issue. So sleep is always a work in progress, trying to optimize that. Where if I, like for example, my daughter, she's 15, granted, she goes to sleep and she's asleep the whole night. She's not getting up. She's not going anywhere. I'd love to have uninterrupted sleep the whole time. So
Mhm.
that's the goal. But it gets harder with age, right? So
But it sounds like your environment has a lot to do with that, right? Obviously, when you transition to your new house, I think that will improve, and hopefully your sleep will improve with it.
yeah, but I'm not sure that the 3 a.m. awakenings are because of the external factors. And it's generally, I'll just wake up and now I'm having these negative thoughts. And it's like, why am I having negative thoughts in the middle of sleep? And
Mhm.
I try to be a zen all day, every day. And then it's like I've got to calm myself down. And it's like, let's go back to sleep, trust the process, focus on the breathing, which I don't have to do that before I go to bed. So it's just like and it's like sleep pressure, right? Like, so if you don't sleep for 3 days, sleep pressure will be high, and you should be able to fall asleep immediately, right? So there's something about the sleep pressure, and I'm sure people will say, well, it's cortisol, and your eating window is too early, and all of that could be factors, So I want to work out that recipe for eliminating the 3 a.m. awakening.
Interesting, because I have very similar patterns. I wake up 3, 4 in the morning for a bathroom break, and I get negative thoughts often too, right? So that, and before bed, sometimes I do too. Anecdotally, I found cutting out all caffeine. I was drinking a lot of tea, black teas. It's helped a little bit, I mean, quite a bit with that. So, whether it continues, it's only been a couple weeks, but I found that's helped. So I think, obviously diet plays a role in it too.
So green tea has been a staple in my approach for probably 20 years every day. And so I'm using the loose leaf stuff, whereas in the past it
Yeah.
was, other lower quality, but um and a lot more of it back then. I used to have a pitcher where I drink that all day. And I mean, that's 60 plus ounces. So that was really bad probably for sleep. So I've gotten it to 20 ounces per day. So I actually did that experiment where I took green tea out for 2 days just a couple of weeks ago, in part because so, slow wave sleep percentage declines during aging. Well, actually, the total amount and the percentage of total sleep time declines during aging. So my data was starting to look that way, but then I guess I didn't expand much on the calorie restriction. I don't know. We can go back to that if you like. But once I got leaner by about 20 pounds over the past 3 years, my slow wave sleep percentage went back to 25%. So
Mhm.
recently, though, over the past 6 months or so, it's been starting to track downward and haven't changed anything. But actually, I have. So there, I'll have the green tea, and it's in a tea ball, and so I'll make a batch, 20 ounces, and then on some days I'll, just boil some more water and keep the same tea ball. So I assume that I'm getting all of the caffeine out on the first batch, but probably I'm getting some caffeine on that second batch too, which may be impacting, I don't know, SWS and sleep quality. So I tested that hypothesis for 2 days, and I hate to say that taking caffeine out for 2 days made me feel terrible during those two
Uh,
days, but and it wasn't like withdrawal. It was more of kind of like I don't know. I generally don't get depressed, and I generally am pretty happy about life. So my attitude on those days was kind of like you know,
mm.
there's a saying about calorie restriction where you know you may live forever, but you'll feel like it. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Where
I heard that.
I kind of felt like that without green tea. So
Mm.
if that's the one I've got to eliminate to make the sleep better, that's going to be a really hard sell. Um, but in the name of resisting age related change, if slow wave sleep declines because I'm getting more caffeine from the green tea, and I've got to take the green tea out. I mean, I've taken other stuff out from the approach.
Yeah.
I'd hate to take that one out, but I'd probably do it.
You got to stick to your motto. You got to, at all costs, right? I mean, that's the goal, to live as
Yep,
long and healthy as possible.
definitely.
So I want to touch on quickly on supplements, and then a triad. Well, these three things I like to group together, but we'll talk about them briefly about supplements. I know you don't take much, if anything, right? You touched on rapamycin before, NAD, or sorry, NMN, and then nicotinic acid, right? Can you just maybe elaborate a little bit about those, or what you're
Yeah.
doing these days with supplements?
So right now the supplements are minimal. The For me the foundation is optimized diet. The triad, right? It's diet, exercise, sleep, uh,
Mm-hmm.
and so optimize that first, and then you know try to tweak the diet to try to get these to optimize these things without the supplements. So I look at, and I've said this in other places. Polypharmacy isn't associated with better outcomes in older adults, and generally the older adults who are on multiple drugs have worse health, not better health. So if you
Right.
fast forward the population of relatively younger people that are taking, purported senolytics and geroprotectors, you fast forward 50 years, and they're taking these things in super physiological doses, which technically could be classified as drugs now, right? I mean, if you're taking quercetin in a dose that's 1,000x you would get it in onions, I mean, it's kind of
Mm-hmm.
like a drug, right? So,
Yeah.
so would those people have better health with taking all of those supplements at older ages? I don't know, right? So I'm on the other side of that fence where I want to try to do everything by diet if I can. Um, and if I can't, then supplementing. So along those lines, vitamin D in Boston here, the summer and spring months to get full body sun exposure is minimal. So I have to supplement with that, for
Right.
most of the year. Um, I'm working on changing that in the future, so that I can get the D from the sun every day and not enough to end up with skin cancer
Mm-hmm.
because I had that from too much tanning. So I'm
Right.
going to be smarter about that. Yeah, 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 yeah. I was going to tanning booths in college trying to get some sun. So if no sun, tanning booth, too much exposure, skin cancer. So I've got to be
Mm-hmm.
smart about that. So I don't want to get none basically for 9 months out of the year, which I do here pretty much. And then NAD. I don't want it to decline during aging. Without supplementation, my data isn't great. It's on the lower side. Fortunately, NAD is not associated with any biological age tests in my data, both the epigenetics or phenoage. So that's the good news. But the other side of it is I don't know how long I can get away with that for. Chronically low NAD, I'd imagine low mitochondrial function, and you're on the road to aging, with worse mitochondrial function. So I've tried to affect NAD with diet over 24 tests, actually 20 tests without anything else, just diet, making, following hypotheses, through videos. I've got a multitude of videos on ways to try to impact NAD, whether it's, apigenin or other dietary means to impact NAD without the precursors, but basically failed on every front. So for that reason, I did play around with NMN, but I find that nicotinic acid in very low doses gives me the same effect for raising NAD as high dose NMN. So a thousand milligrams of NMN is equivalent in my data to I think like 300 milligrams of nicotinic acid, so a third less dose, somewhere in that ballpark. And then 2,000 milligrams NMN, 600 milligrams of nicotinic acid, so a third lower dose for so which is going to be cheaper, right? So, but for now, I'm on a lower dose of nicotinic acid, and I'm still trying to titrate to figure out what may be optimal there. And then for things like homocysteine in my data is not genetic. I've had values around 5 micromolar in my youth, 20 years ago, which is close to twice as high now, and it increases during aging. So I don't have genetic polymorphisms. If I did, it would be higher in youth than higher now, right? So I've gone through the gamut of TMG, serine plus B6, folate, methylfolate B6, B12, methyl B12, um, other methylated amino acids, proline betaine, tryptophan betaine, because methylated amino acids, that's what trimethylglycine is. It doesn't only have to be trimethylglycine, it can be other methylated amino acids, which didn't work for me.
Your
So
type pathway at all angles sounds like, right?
every angle, every biochemical angle you can think of. And
Yeah, yeah.
glycine, I went with glycine, trying to get it through serine. That didn't work either. Um, so I'm on N-acetylcysteine right now. That's the most latest experiment. And diet doesn't, I mean, there are things in my diet that suggest that could bring down homocysteine, like, for example, higher protein in my data. And then people will say, yeah, because meat has methyl, methyl B12. So it's the B12, but you don't get nearly enough B12 to make a dent on homocysteine. In my case, I've got to go above 500 micrograms per day of B12 to bring down homocysteine by only about 10%. So, I mean, sure, more meat, more protein will give me some B12, but we're talking in the, teens of micrograms versus the hundreds of micrograms that I need to make a dent. So, N-acetylcysteine in two separate clinical trials a long time ago reduced homocysteine in a dose dependent manner. So, that's the latest experiment. But I'm on the lowest dose, 1.5 grams per day right now. So, we'll see if that makes a dent, if at all, in homocysteine. But I don't want to improve one thing, homocysteine, and make other things worse. So,
Right.
it's the
Balance
cumulative,
that.
yeah, cumulative tracking. So, but yeah, I try to use the supplements as little as possible so that if I do get to an age 80, 90, whenever it's 60, I don't know, when maybe my insulin sensitivity is worse for whatever reason, and nothing that I do resists the age related increase for glucose, right? Then I'd imagine that a targeted supplementation approach will be the most efficacious. Whereas if I've been taking, metformin or whatever the drug of choice may be for a given biomarker, if I've been taking that in youth when I really didn't need it as a band-aid to fix suboptimal deficiencies through diet or, sleep or whatever it may be, what's going to happen 50 years later when that efficacy may efficacy may not be as good, right? Do you just go to a higher dose? Like, so, you can give type 2 diabetics more insulin, but, you know, uh, locally that may be good, but chronically higher insulin is not going to be good for
Mhm.
longevity, right? So I'm trying to use supplements in a last case resort, only when I need it and all else has failed. And even in that situation, for things like methyl B12, like I said, it does reduce homocysteine by a small amount, but other biomarkers are going in the wrong direction. So, I'm trying to make the biggest gain without messing up other stuff too.
Honestly, I think that's the smartest approach. Not to throw shade at other people, but that's one of the big flaws I find in Brian's approach. Right, throwing every supplement that he can into his body. I don't know. I don't think that makes sense to me, and a lot of people, right, in terms of longevity and health.
But so I think actually Brian's coming around, because if he wasn't, at least in that mindset, because if he wasn't, so he stopped rapamycin recently, and I'd
Yeah,
imagine it's only through a careful analysis of objective biomarkers and maybe even how he feels that Pete stopped using it, right? He had to have some amount of data that suggested it was
yeah,
worse or neutral at best rather than better, right? So,
yeah,
I know I said this before and I sound like probably an arrogant prick when I say it, but all roads lead to self tracking and seeing if the net effect is positive, neutral, or detrimental with some objective means, right? So,
yeah,
and I don't want to say I'm the only one cornering the market on it, but eventually all roads lead to that approach.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, how else are you going to know? Exactly,
Yep.
exactly. Even David Sinclair has said, you wouldn't drive a car without a dashboard, right? You wouldn't know how fast you're going and things like that. So it makes sense to test and know your metrics.
But David wasn't. I don't want to say I influenced it. I don't want to be that type, because my dad would send faxes to George Bush. I don't know. I'm not a politics guy at all. I hate politics. I don't want it to get in the way of anything. But my dad's big into politics and whatever. So he loved George Bush Jr. and somehow he had the fax number to somewhere. I don't know, in the White House or related to the White House. So he would fax them things, and whenever they would say something, he'd be like, "Oh, I said that to him." I don't want to say it's because of me, but uh, you know, David was only talking about NAD and NMN for a long time, and he started posting like you know, I think his NAD results or something along those lines. And I started responding on X back when it was Twitter. What about all of your other biomarkers? And then he started to post some of that data. So, and I'm not sure if it's because of me or people like me that you can't just show me your NAD levels and nothing else, or your triglyceride to HDL ratio and glucose levels, and tell me your health is great. Kidney, liver, immune. Show me all of it. And like I said, for a few years, right? So anyone can cherry pick data. So
Right.
I don't know how much of an impact on that. Even trying to do that with Brian. Show all of your data. Show all of it. Like, don't get me wrong. Like I said before, I like Brian a lot. I appreciate Brian. I look at this as an and space. I don't want to ever be perceived as the or type. It's either more my way or no way. I don't want ever to be in that situation. You know, I appreciate all different points of view, even from people who don't have a science background. I listen to everybody. There may be some truth in everything. So I don't want to criticize Brian and have it come across as trying to take any shade away from him. But he recently posted that big diagram with a lot of biomarkers, and I'm the most tested guy and all my data is youthful, but there are no dates. I don't know when each of those is. That one test? Is that on the same day of testing? Is that your best data historically? I mean, a head scratch. I don't know,
Right.
so that's where the field is. It's don't show me 3 tests on the epigenetic rejuvenation leaderboard, which I've even said this, publicly. Like, it's got to be year to year change over many tests, but the sample size of people who are doing that gets much smaller, right? So, but that's how it should start, where we're looking at year to year change with enough testing days to say this is actually representative of a full year change, right? And uh, now, granted, I'm not trying to be in competition against anyone else and say, "Oh, my data is better than yours." I don't care about that at all. Even though I've said, I want to be the best on the leaderboard. I mean, it'd be great, but honestly, I don't care about that. I want to have the best and most useful data that I can have. So, but yeah, showing all of the data and that's the most important thing.
Yeah, I think in this, people say it in several aspects. You shouldn't compete. You shouldn't compare yourself to other people. But
Yeah.
I think in terms of longevity, health span, like this is truly you're competing against yourself. You're trying to be the best version of yourself, right? And maximize your lifespan and health span.
and,
So
and, and not just that, I agree 100%. If we all show our best data, or if we all show all of the data, you know all of us aren't going to make it. Like, so rapamycin extends lifespan in animal models, right? And then you have prominent people who were, and again, I'm not trying to throw shade. That's the last thing I want to do. Again, I don't ever want to come across as negative, just calling it like it is. But Alan Green and Blagostoni, or if I'm saying his name incorrectly, don't kill me.
yeah,
Blagoscloni.
Mikael.
Yes, Mikhail Black. Yeah, pro rapamycin, and these guys are not alive anymore. And I think Alan Green was 80-ish. Mikhail died earlier than that, and he had brain cancer. I mean, it's terrible. So
Did he
uh,
pass away recently? He must have been recent, right?
yeah, yeah.
Uh,
And, so now you could say these are two people in a sea of people who are taking rapamycin, but you know, I look at the show all of your data approach because maybe I fall into that category too. Maybe I'll be dead in 10 years. I hope not. But, if I show all my data and I have weak spots and I'm honest about those weak spots, I try to be as honest as, like, for example, I posted, I've been taking levothyroxine for half my life, right? So I posted my recent blood test data, and I showed my T4 and T3, free T4, free T3. And when you look at that within the context of aging and all cause mortality risk, it's terrible. It's what I'd expect to see in a 95-year-old for all of that. So, in showing all of our data, whether it's Brian, me, or other people, younger generations can see it and say, this is where they went wrong, and this is where we can do better. And if we don't conquer aging and die trying, then at least the younger generations can learn from whatever mistakes we make and do better and continue to push this longevity window out. Whereas if we're only showing our best data, we'll never get, it'll take forever to get there because they don't have the whole story. It's the cherry pick story, right? So if I
mhm.
fail, I want people to get better because of my approach and improve upon where maybe I didn't include things.
Yeah, totally agree. Yeah, I would love to talk more about rapamycin and then metformins and the other drugs that are out there. But I know you talked about that a little bit on other podcasts. And for the sake of time, I'd like to touch two other subjects if you have a few more minutes.
Yeah.
The one being the triad that I mentioned previously. Something that even myself saw as maybe woo in some regards was stress management, community, or I guess socializing, and then also purpose or ikigai as the Japanese call it, right? So I know they're, I bundle them into one, but maybe we can touch about on that if you're practicing any of that. And you mentioned meditation before, so I'd like to kind of hear your thoughts on those. I think they're kind of underlooked in the longevity space in some degrees.
Yeah, definitely. If I miss any of them, just remind me because we got three heads to hit, right? So
Yeah, yeah.
the stress management, agree 100%, and that goes into that idea of so HRV and resting heart rate are basically fantastic stress indicators. So uh,
Mm-hmm.
a hard workout won't just reduce my HRV and increase my resting heart rate. I've had like high emotional days where some traumatic life event will trigger, sympathetic nerve activity, and I'm just on fire emotionally just for whatever reason, whether it's work or family issues, right? And my data will tank the next day as if I did a 90-minute workout and I haven't gone anywhere. All I've done is activate my sympathetic nervous system. So stress management is a huge part of this whole thing. And, but again, how much of an impact on health span and lifespan, I'm not sure. But when considering, these measures can be tracked over a long period of time, and HRV declines during aging and resting heart rate, well, inverse U. So you don't want it to go an age related increase, but also the weakening of the heart and slowing of the heart rate. Uh, so I am tracking it. I'm trying to resist age-related changes, and I don't actively do anything stress management-wise, but I try to live as zen a life as possible, which can be a challenge as a parent, as I'm sure you know. But
Mm-hmm.
even yesterday, my 15-year-old did something like dumb, and and she compounded it by getting my mom involved. And then I was like, what are you guys doing? And it like I could feel my stress hormones just kick in. And
Mm-hmm.
then I even said to her, I was like, why do you want to traumatize? I mean, it's physical and emotional trauma. So I try to be as zen as possible, as much as possible for now. I don't do anything active like meditation. I can't. I'll end up falling asleep, and it's just not for meditation. It's just not for me.
Yeah.
Um, uh, but I do try to, rest and relax as much as possible when I'm not, physically active, right? So, so I was actually looking at my,
What are breathing techniques? Sorry.
yeah,
No,
it's not
man.
for me. Not, yeah, it's just, it doesn't make a dent really on, I don't have the patience for it, and it doesn't make a dent on the data for me. But if it works for others, that's great. So, I was actually looking at my stress trace. So Whoop has a stress trace over the day,
Yeah.
and so yesterday I had a workout, and it was around noon. So I mean, when you think about evolutionarily, like what should our stress levels look like throughout the day, right? Should it be maximally stressed right before we go to bed, and then try to relax while we're asleep? So I'm starting to think that the majority of our stress should probably be earlier in the day, whether it's exercise or I don't know, work or whatever it may be. And then the rest of the day, we're recovering from that so that we could have because if you're somewhat already stressed going into sleep, I think it'll be harder to relax while you're asleep. Right. So, my stress trace was basically, went up to around noon, and it, came beautifully down, and it isn't always like that. Even though I try to have that. So, I guess that's how I would look at stress management, where I have my triggering stress events and I try to recover all day by just literally, working on the couch and trying not to let, for lack of a better word, bullshit agitate me. Right. So,
Mm-hmm.
um, all right, stress was one thing. Community. So, I'm not the most social type. It's hard to get me out. I've said this in other places. Um, That said, before the advent of the internet, right, it used to be where if you didn't have a local community, you're kind of screwed, because if you don't really relate to the people who are around you, you're kind of a social outcast, right? Which is terrible for community, terrible for mental health. And I was kind of in that boat, right? So the internet has been fantastic, in part because of the YouTube channel, where now there's basically an international community of people I can interact with, and even on Patreon too, where that's been growing nicely, and I'm communicating people with people there who share the same goal, and I at times I'm learning from them, and probably vice versa. So, is it as good as the in-person community? Probably not, but better than where it was, and you know, eventually the goal is to have, some of a local community, which is glaringly deficient now, but I just don't have the time in my schedule to race around doing stuff. And that's actually not how I'm built. I'm just not the type to go hang out in small talk places. I just can't, so a couple of my college friends hit me up, and it's been, probably 20 years since I've seen them. And, I really like them a lot, but I'm a totally different person. And I don't know how that will go in terms of small talk and all the other stuff. So it's going to be a little bit different for me. But so anyway, community is a big part of it too. I agree 100%. It's innumerably better than where it was. And it's always a work in progress for me. So, and then the last aspect was,
I just want to touch on that for a little bit. I find in their longevity space, especially somebody or people like us, especially you track a lot. Maybe viewed as fringe and obviously frowned upon by a lot of people, right? And I think it's hard to find commonality, maybe, right? So whether it comes from what you practice, but also what time you eat, what time you go to bed. I think it's hard to kind of find those interconnecting lines with individuals in the general population. So I like how you're finding that community through your YouTube channel and through your social posts.
yeah,
Yeah,
so that's a great point. And it isn't always easy though, because it is a challenge in the real world without, uh, if that longevity community that I can interact with on a daily basis was the real life community that I experience on the day to day, it would be fantastic. And that is, obviously part of the goal if I can get there. But
yeah,
at some point, I flipped the switch where I was like, I'm not sacrificing who I am. So just as a quick story. So in college, I was always into the fitness mindset and bringing my food places, and people were like, this dude is weird. And
hmm
I mean, it is weird, whatever, even my daughter's mother, when we first met, I was weighing my food and she was like, what are you doing? That's weird. So she kind of shamed me out of it for a couple of years, but I went back to it. That's who I am. That's what I enjoy. So, there's a statement, there's a phrase, those who mind don't matter, and those who matter don't mind. So at some point that became kind of like my thing, where this is who I am. I'm not embarrassed. I'm not, ashamed of it. This is who I am. You either appreciate it or you don't. If you don't, that's your right. If you do, it's great. But I'm not going to sacrifice it. There are people at work that'll have pizza and muffins for lunch, and I'm sitting there fasting, and I'm the only one, and I feel completely out of place, and it makes me feel terrible. But having the scent of pizza in my face for an hour isn't good either. I mean, imagine who it smells good. You know what I mean? So there's kind of some of that detoxification that I have to go through afterwards, where I'm like getting my. So anyway,
And in the comments you hear generally, or once in a while, right, from individuals, then
YouTube is great. At least my channel has been great
or
for the
in
most.
comments in person, right, when you're fasting or avoiding that food, right? People point it out.
I don't know. I think my RBF, resting face, resting B face,
Mm-hmm,
can be pretty stern, for better or worse. And
mm-hmm.
I think when yeah, I don't. Most people who they just don't challenge it, and once I tell them this is what I do, it's like, okay, let's leave him alone. He's already a little weird. Let's leave him alone. So, but I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
You know, um, it took me a long time to figure out my place in the world, if there is a place, and where I was like, what's my value to society? I wandered for a long time. So first college degree, in between, well, second college, well, before going back to school, was like 5 years where I was just literally moving around in states, trying different jobs, and I didn't have an identity, didn't have a sense of who I was as a person, or what my passion in life was going to be. And once I got on that road, this longevity road, it's basically this is who I am, right? And people can appreciate it or not, right? So, but I stopped apologizing for that. Even like I said, even my mom, when she's trying to push, hey, I made this cake, and I was like, I don't think you understand. I ate already. My calories are done for the day. I don't even want to think about that. Please don't. And she'll still push, which is ridiculous. But um, yeah, I don't. I understand the struggle. It can be tough socially. Most people are not like that, but it goes back to those who mind don't matter, and those who matter don't mind, right? There's plenty of people now who, for better or worse, appreciate this is how I am, and probably a lot more who don't. But this is what works best for my physical and mental health. Why should I change it? Right. So,
I think I and many people in the community fight the same battles, right? So you're not alone in that regard. It's and I think people like Brian are pushing the envelope and making this maybe more the norm. People understanding what they're actually consuming, what they're doing, and being more cognizant of and aware of what's happening to your body, what you're putting into your body, how you're treating your body. I think that's going to become more standardized, more the norm in the near future. So yeah, hopefully for
yeah.
us.
So I have another thought along those lines. So, it used to be, I don't know if you're a fan of the Matrix movies, but I love all those movies, and all three after the first one too, and for a variety of reasons. But that's another story. But when the first movie came out, and they dressed up like they're in the Matrix, back then, uh, dressing like that was kind of odd. Nobody did that. It was kind of like this country was like corporatized, where you had to dress in a suit and tie if you went to work, and God forbid that you didn't shave. You know what I mean? Like, you had to look a certain way, so that they dressed like that was kind of like cool because nobody was doing it. But then everyone can dress like that now. It's not cool anymore. If you see people dressed up like that, it's so what? You do you. That's how you are. Nobody thinks anything of it because it's more common.
Mhm.
But now it looks like, so I'll watch like YouTube videos of like DJs, and shirt off, not because it's a dude, or I mean, girls are in bikinis. Granted, the girls in bikinis gets clicks, so I get why they're doing it. But the dude, I don't know that the dudes that are DJing, or at least the drum and bass that I watch, are doing it for clicks. Anyway, the reason I mention that is, for me, I think now the greatest flex is health, because if you're all covered up like you're wearing some suit from the Matrix, anybody can do that. But taking care of yourself and really putting in the work, and this isn't about looking like a bodybuilder who's jacked like a horse. You know what I mean? Lean and fit and functional. For me, there is no greater flex. So walking around at 80, and yeah. So for me, that's taking off your shirt and showing people that there is no greater flex than that. So I don't know how did we get into that? How did I don't know how yeah, something you said
Yeah.
triggered me to go down that road.
No, I agree. I mean, and it's the next level flex because a nice physique was always admired, I think, to some extent by a lot of people, but in old age, not so much. Now people are doing that, and it goes beyond that, right? Not only looking good externally, but actually internally having health internally. So
Especially internally, right? So it's not
yeah,
just about the outside, the internal too. And if you got them both, even better, right? So, someone like Jack LaLanne, who died at 95 and was fit on the outside at least his whole life. I mean, and I've said this before. What if he tracked? Like, would pneumonia, I think he died from pneumonia, would that pneumonia have snuck up on him?
yeah,
Which, I mean, basically got pneumonia. And then when you look at him in his early 90s, he was starting to walk like an old man. So there's a physiological and biochemical process to all that, right? Like, so what if he tracked the internal health? So I don't know that he would have done better, but I find it hard to believe that he wouldn't, right? So
yeah. I think there'd be a good chance he would have. Yeah. And then you touched on about your purpose. It seems like you found your purpose in longevity, right? You want to obviously learn for yourself and maximize again your lifespan, your health span, but also teach as many people as you can what you're doing and what you did right, what you did wrong, what's working for you, what's not. It sounds like without putting words in your mouth, that's kind of what your purpose is, potentially.
yeah, and I didn't start off like that. So it took a long time to get there. And I don't come from, my family background is not in science. There were no doctors in the family, no PhDs. Um, it took a long time to evolve into that, and I'm completely comfortable with all of it.
Mm,
That's what I'm here to do. Right now, that said, I'd love it if aging was conquered, because I do have other interests that I'd like to pursue, but I can't, because the darkest cloud hanging over all of us is that we're going to die, right? So in this life, if anything is beyond, I don't know, but in this life, it's for now conquer aging, and yeah,
is it to some degree stressing you out at some?
no, definitely
No?
not. The
Okay.
opposite. The opposite. I get great peace of peace of mind, by doing all this. There's no stress at all. I'd be stressed if I wasn't doing it, I think.
Okay.
um, I've lived a lot of my life without doing parts of this approach, and I'm just not a better person. this is me at my best physically, mentally, cognitively. I can't imagine it would be better, if I wasn't doing parts of it. So
Awesome. So we're running a bit long, but if you have a couple minutes, I wanted to touch on this because I know since, I think at the beginning, is this still your goal to live as long as possible or forever, I guess, ideally? And if it is, what do you see? Are there any therapies or interventions you're seeing that you will use in the next few years, potentially? Like, Brian Johnson has been dabbling with gene therapies, as some other people have. There's TP, total plasma exchange, right? There's other ones that can be tried now. They're very fringe, and the safety profiles of those are not well known in terms of long term, at least. And then, more distant future, do you see anything coming around that's could potentially actually slow down aging or ideally reverse our age, such as epigenetic reprogramming or you know anything else that you might see?
yeah. So your the first question was, goal is the goal the same? Longevity, 100%.
Yeah,
Conquer aging or die trying. That will always be the case. I can't think of anything else I care about more. I mean, my family, I guess, but um, they can't enjoy me if I'm not around. So nothing will supersede that. That will always be the case. I mean, it's funny because there's some amount of what's the word where it's your you know like when I first earned the PhD, it was like, am I really smart? What's that term where you know there's like a term where it's like, it's like fake.
foster syndrome.
Imposter syndrome. That's right. Yeah. So there's always like, will this go away?
Hmm.
I had that after getting the PhD back then, but I haven't had that for a long time. But that idea is always there where it's like, well, I care about this in 5 years, right? But I've cared about it for the past 10, and I'm getting more. I care about it more every day, right? Not less. So I'll always care about it. I find it hard to believe fitness on its own has been a focus. I'm married to my workout routine in terms of regularity and all that, so it will always be there. Um, in terms of therapeutics, I prefer the targeted approach, right? So if there's a specific organ system, you know, uh, I don't think that all systems will physiologically decline at the same rate. I think it's the weakness of one that will, rear its head. And there's always one and it's kind of like whack-a-mole, right? Is the liver,
Hmm.
is the kidney, right? Which one is it? And addressing that, right? So, but knowing that I track so often, there's a balance there between, is this a sign of some real stuff going on, or can I actually fix this with my own approach? And then if I take too long, like say it's cancer, right? And I'm like, this is just some aberrant pattern. I can fix it, just let me track my own data for a little bit of time, but maybe that's stupid and I die, right? From cancer or whatever. So there has to be a balance between, I can fix this, I can't fix this. Um, that being said, assuming I can play that game, that fine line, I see a road for targeted therapies. I don't believe in the ubiquitous blanket, whether it's plasma exchange, and actually in terms of plasma exchange, I'm in a boat that I think is completely different from the field. I don't want to take young blood and put it in my old blood without addressing the root of the problem. I want my young blood to be, or my relatively young blood, to be as young as possible for as long as possible. So I don't need that young blood transfusion, right? Whereas I think most people aren't thinking about that at all. And it's like, can I put the young molecules basically in and temporarily clean out or dilute the old stuff? So
Yeah.
I'm kind of looking at it from the ground up rather than the top down. So,
Yeah.
but that said, in terms of other therapeutics, it would be a targeted approach where it's something that it's on that tiptoe of, it's a definite problem. I don't have enough time, or the things I have done in a short time don't work. I can't waste any more time. And now I've got to do this specific therapy because it's known to have this efficacious effect. And I have that specific weakness. So I think that will be the best approach in my eyes. Just and that's assuming it's a serious health condition, right? So um, I'm hopeful about epigenetic reprogramming. I think a big part of aging is the genes get turned off, and Now you've got whole networks of proteins that aren't there anymore, and you have
Mhm.
less metabolic flux because those proteins aren't there, and now you have decreased tissue and cellular and tissue function. That's a big part of aging. You could say what's triggering the genes to be turned off in the first place, right? So um, some of that may be related to microbial burden, and I don't know if you want to go down the rabbit hole of infected cells. Virally infected cells can become senescent because if the cells don't go senescent, the virus can transform that cell into a protein machinery, protein making factory. But if the cell goes senescent, it can't do that. So now we've got more senescent cells that may be infected with viruses. And there's no published data on that. It's
Yeah.
known that senescent cells, once infected, can go virally infected cells can go senescent. But I don't think anybody has actually looked at in aging, is the batch of senescent cells that we isolate, is that virally infected? It's only
Mhm.
known in vitro that they will go senescent if they're infected with viruses. So um,
Yeah, I think that whole subject is. I love that podcast that you had recently about infectious disease and that tie-in immune system. I think that's huge. That's being explored a lot right now, and I think that's going to be a big player in longevity.
I hope you're right, but I wrote a book in 2016 called Microbial Burden: A Major Cause of Aging and Age-Related Disease. Not trying to plug it, but here we are 9 years later, and we're still close to the same page as we were 9 years ago, right? Proal, Dr. Amy Proal, she and I have been talking about this for years. So, granted, what she's doing is fantastic, and she's pushing the field so far forward that it wasn't moving like that. So there is progress, but I'd imagine some aspect of epigenetic genes being turned off is in part because of microbes that we've got to turn those genes off. Whereas if we don't, uh, you know, we'll have chronic infection over a long period of time, which is bad for health and longevity. But if we don't turn it off, so I see that as a big part of the story. It's not all of the story, but so I'd want to figure out why we would need the genes being turned off in the first place. That I'm interested in. But yeah, epigenetic reprogramming. But in terms of when that's going to be a big deal, for example, nutrigenomics was hot as a keyword, as a buzzword
Yeah,
20 years ago. And I thought about doing graduate studies in that. And here we are 20 years later. And what can we do?
exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
So how long will it be for epigenetic reprogramming? I mean, we're just people like David's group. And I give David great respect for that because I see very few labs who are jumping into that pool. And,
Mhm.
hopefully his lab does great work there and doesn't oversell the data, but because that can be a strike on David. But how long will it take for the field to be saturated by the epigenetic reprogramming crew to have real results where it can make an impact on aging? I hope I can stay alive long enough to find out. So,
Right. Great. No, I think there's some fascinating developments. And just circling back for a second, for the whole TPE, I think you're right. I mean, there's not many people that I would want, even if they're young, to get their blood, right? To rejuvenate my body. With maybe exception being like Brian or Brian's son or something like that, right? But I think dilution has a lot of potential too. It's not a very target approach, but dilution of your plasma, there's some benefits there as well. There's some promising studies by I think Irene Convoy, right,
yeah.
and her group. Yeah, so I like that. I'm following that as well. And it's something very low cost that can be done, right, and I think minimally risk, right, donating plasma. Aside from your whole blood circulating through plastic tubes and so on and being reinserted to your body, but I mean that's a different subject. Yeah.
So I'm a big fan of Irina Convoy and her group. Big fan. And I don't mean any shade on them at all. But and even Vadim Gladyshev has published some on the TPE.
Hmm.
So I took a look at the lifespan data in the TPE study, and if you look at Camille Pabis, who I had on the channel, and he's a part of Brian Kennedy's group, and they looked at longevity in mouse studies, and they basically came up with the 900-day rule, where a majority of lifespan extending interventions, unfortunately, happen in short-lived mouse models. So you may have, for example, C57 black 6 mice who generally have an average lifespan of 900 days, but for whatever reason, under certain lab conditions, they'll end up living shorter. And interventions on that background, on the shorter lived C57 background, can lead to a median lifespan extension, but it doesn't get past 900 days. So if you actually extended lifespan, if all you did was get back to the natural lifespan, or at least the natural lifespan in the lab. So I looked at the TPE study, and the rightward shift in median lifespan, I think it's only goes to around 900 days. And there was no impact on maximum lifespan.
Right.
So I'm not sold on it as a lifespan promoting intervention. Could have other effects on health span related measures. I think they showed a lot of data, which it's more promising from that point of view. And probably there would need to be details sorted out, like how often you would need to do it to safely do it to get the rejuvenation effects over a long period of time. But in terms of it extending at least median lifespan, I'd have to cross that one off my list.
Yeah, no, I think I would agree with that. And then the other layer to that is for individuals such as yourself, which has most of, if not all of his biomarkers pretty optimally ranged. Right? I don't think even diluting would move the needle too much, probably, right? Like many therapies, right? Whether
And
it's
that goes
yeah.
well, that goes to the rapamycin story where, I did it for a week and I actually felt worse. And I know some people will say, yeah, you felt worse. That's normal. There's a die off effect, but I felt worse and I generally don't feel that bad. It was out of the ordinary bad. My
Mm,
fitness metrics got worse. My blood pressure, which I have in a pretty tight range over, 350 different days of measurement over the past 2 to 3 years, got worse. So I didn't do full blood testing, but I tested Candida IgG. Rapamycin is a known antifungal. It didn't work in my case, so I didn't take it a step further. Why do I need to look at it on biomarkers if it didn't do what it's known to do and work as an antifungal? So I put all of that together in someone probably generally healthy like me, not a good thing. But for people who may have more specific, targeted condition, whether it's, I don't know, elevated inflammation or whatever the situation may be, where rapamycin can maybe kill off some fungi that may be affecting them. Maybe we're all chronically subclinically infected with fungi and rapamycin helps, or maybe the mice have some subclinical fungi infection that rapamycin helps in extending lifespan. I don't know, but that goes back to the idea of objective biomarkers, and finding out when a certain therapy will be beneficial, neutral, or detrimental.
awesome. It makes sense. So, last question. Feel free not to answer if you don't feel comfortable doing it. But are you hedging your bets with cryogenics? What are your thoughts on
Wow.
cryogenics?
So now we're into kind of the philosophical,
Yeah.
because our senses evolved to detect a small amount of reality, right? So first I want to say, uh, I'm probably as close to an atheist as you can get. I'm heavily agnostic, but I can't call myself an atheist either, because the fact is we are specks of dust in an infinite universe, and who knows what actually is, right? So I can't say that there is, and I can't say that there isn't. So I'm in the agnostic category. If people want to believe, I won't say who or what. I, I have friends that are theists, and friends that are atheists, right? So it gets into the philosophy where our senses evolve to detect a small portion of reality, right? So um, there's a part of me that thinks, and I don't know how much of a part of me is it 5%? I don't know. Is it just the idea of it? But who's to say this reality isn't the end, right? And if I do end up cryogenically frozen, now I'm stuck like Han Solo for infinity until someone, and I say someone, comes along who will unfreeze me when the tech gets there. Now I've thought about that, and so for sure my daughter will care, right? So I've got probably 100 years, assuming she gets another 100 years. If she lives to 115, I don't know, put 80 years. I'm sure if she has kids, I'm sure I'll be around for her kids and maybe even her kids. So what is that, a 150-year window for those three generations of people who will actually know me and say, this is my grandpa or my great grandpa. I want to get him out, right? Because once we get beyond a generation who doesn't know me, who doesn't care, who's just reading about me or watching my videos when I'm frozen, I don't know. Will it be Neo, like Neo in the last Matrix, where he's gone for 60 years and he's got generation upon generation of people who care? I think that's a small minority. I think the people who will care the most to unfreeze me when the time is right is my direct family. So I think I've got a 150-year window to hedge that bet. So now I'm weighing that versus the infinity of a frozen prison, which if there is anything beyond, maybe I'm frozen in there forever. I don't know. And honestly, I don't know if there is anything beyond this existence, right? Because, the visible spectrum is a small portion of the electromagnetic spectrum, and we evolved to detect a very small portion of it. Even our hearing, there is, there are frequencies below 20 hertz and above 20,000 hertz that we can't detect, that other animals can detect. What exists beyond this reality that we've only evolved to perceive for survival? So, is there an afterlife in that? I don't know. Honestly, I don't know, and I'm being legit. Like, I honestly don't know. Am I an idiot for thinking that maybe something exists beyond that? I mean, there's quantum entanglement where you've got photons that are here and then somewhere else, and they could be in a different galaxy entangled, right? I mean, I don't know that that's the case for our existence. Whether we can boil ourselves down to the quantum level as entangled somewhere else, but that's the debate that I have, is this existential. Do I want to freeze myself for how long? 150 years, where maybe nobody cares after that, and maybe the company goes out of business, and I'm thawed anyway, no matter what. Versus, the what is reality, and what is the nature of reality? What's the true nature of reality? And that kind of goes into, we didn't touch on it, but you know, I hope aging could be conquered ASAP. And I wanted to say, I hope aging could be conquered ASAP Rocky. It's just a rapper. I don't know. I like saying that after ASAP, but
Yeah, yeah.
um, because I'm obsessed with the nature of reality and quantum physics. And I've always, for a long time thought about that. And, I'd even go into studying it. I'd go as far as PhD level educating myself if I could, in terms of having the time to do it. But that's the bet that I'm taking, where I can't, because all day, every day is aging and longevity and papers and videos and, research and clients, but if aging was conquered, I'd be deep in that quantum. I'd be deep in that world too, really trying to get at the root of the nature of reality, which could probably help answer some of these existential questions in existence, right? So,
Hmm. It sounds like you clearly thought that through thoroughly. So I appreciate you being candid about that.
how are you hedging? How do you see that dichotomy? Cryogenics?
Yeah, you know what? I just started exploring it the past couple of years, and at one point I was really looking into tomorrow biosciences, and I don't know if you're really a company. They're out in Europe, and they're one of the cryonics or cryogenics companies. But yeah, I think I'm similar in this regard as well as you. I do consider I was raised Catholic, and there is a part of me that wants to believe that there's a God, there's a higher deity, and yeah, I think, being frozen and not being able to move on to the potential afterlife would is a big detriment, big negative factor. And then
Yeah,
the other part, like you said, is how long do I really want to be around for? Um, I definitely want to be around for a few generations, but whether forever, I'm not sure yet. It's something that I grapple with and I think about. And then depending on other people, right? I mean, civilization. Well, a lot of things could happen, right? I might not want to be back, be thawed in a couple hundred years, depending what civilization looks like. So,
yeah. And then would
yeah,
you have any money, right? You'd have to plan, right? So, I mean, what, you get unthawed, and then you're just a homeless guy because you didn't. How does that work,
exactly,
right? So,
exactly. Yeah, a
well,
lot of questions. Yeah, yeah,
I want to, I want to say forever, but I don't want to die at any point. I don't want to be less functional, or whether that's cognitively or physically in any way. But I hear you in the, maybe you become outdated and it's time to move on, I guess. You know what I
yeah,
mean? Right. So, but I'm also, I care about the rest of society, where I pay attention to dumb pop culture trends, where I want to know what's going on. And will that always be the case? Right. Well, maybe I'd want to check out of society, but I don't see death as a part of that road. I don't know. So if there is a God, it would want us, I think it would want me to, like I said, squeeze the juice of life out
yeah,
of this orange as much as I can. And I can think of no more noble way to live life, right? So, and then if there is some kind of eternity on the other side, I think that some God would appreciate that you lived, you got as much out of your life as physically possible. So it's funny when you were saying, when you were telling me about all that, it was just, I had another thought too, where cryogenics versus all the other stuff. there's a part of me too where it's like, if I die trying, just bury me somewhere or burn me to death, because I am shit. I am shit. I failed. I am not worth any. So that's the competition in my mind coming out, where it's like, just throw me away like a piece of garbage. I failed. I didn't do what I'm here to do. So, and I say that kind of facetiously, but
Yeah,
there's some
harsh way to
aspect of
look at it.
it. Yeah, but it's kind of true, right? I mean, you serve your purpose, and if you didn't achieve your purpose, then throw me in the bin, right? So,
Yeah. Well, Mike, I really appreciate your time today. We have very similar backgrounds and similar paths, it looks like. So I'd like to give you a chance to kind of give a plug to where people can find you. If there's anything that you're promoting right now, the floor is yours again.
yeah, thanks, Lucas. It was great. I enjoyed it. Conquer Aging or Die Trying. We're everywhere: YouTube, Instagram, X, Spotify. Um, and that's it. I'm easy to find. I'm all over the internet, assuming that the internet doesn't get shut down anytime soon, right? That's the next thing. What happens if the internet gets shut down and we're all can't interact, right?
Exactly, exactly. Well, again, appreciate this. It was awesome. Happy New Year, and love to do this again down the road.
Ciao. All right. Thanks, Lucas. Off I
Sure.
go. All right. Bye.